Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good coffee break, and probably actually tea or coffee this time, because it was a little bit cold in the first session. We've made the request to turn the aircon down or to put the temperature up. So hopefully that will start having an impact on the room very soon. I think maybe it's just we are so used, whenever I come to Russia, it tends to be in January and February. So I think I wanted to make myself feel at home by having the temperatures that I normally find when I come to Russia in January. I hope you enjoyed the first session, and I hope you enjoyed the voting survey that we did. It was good that there was an overall feeling of positivity. I think it's careful positivity. No one is going crazy, but at least we can look at moving upwards instead of the fear that the industry was continuing to go downwards. And in this session, we'll be looking again at some other opportunities for moving forward. We have a parts supplier, a successful Russian parts supplier, and looking at how they are successfully transitioning their company. We'll be looking at changes and managing the customs systems in Russia, and then looking at some ideas, opportunities, investment in logistics, in automotive and logistics as well. So hopefully it's, again, another positive session where we can learn and look forward to moving the industry forward. So I'd like to welcome to the stage the first speaker of the day, Alexander Golovanets, the Deputy Director for OEM Cooperation and New Projects from SKAD. Thank you, Alexander.
Добрый день. Мой доклад, наверное...
My presentation will be a bit unusual, I think, because I represent first-tier suppliers. We produce discs, cast discs, and cast aluminum discs. We supply them, have been supplying them in the course of 10 years to all food productions in Russia, starting from 2014. We started supplying them to the European plants. For you to understand, 3 key points. The easternmost point is where our production is located. In between is a Moscow warehouse. And the westernmost point is the location of food plants to which we supply. Our export history started in 2014 with technical support. Since there was a deficit of production capacity among food regular suppliers, and they addressed us with the same issue. From the point of view of today's experience, it was first task was the most simple task. We only produced and also custom cleared. The deliveries works food delivered everything else themselves, so it was simple to the utmost. But then we turned over to the long-term contracts, hence more difficult and more comprehensive tasks. The manufacturer, the OEM, demands the regional warehouse presence. So the first task was to create such a regional warehouse in Germany. After that, we conducted huge works in terms of developing customs contract, because in the logics of our customs service, this contract, or to their logics, this contract was not usual. We moved the cargo to their bonded warehouse in the export mode and then distributed and sold in the course of several months based on orders. And the launch of this contract took a lot of time on our side. But on the other hand, we turned into the remote, from the remotest into the nearest supplier with the possibility to supply very fast if need be. Unfortunately, we do not have the customs service representative here. We might have had a good discussion with them because our legislation is not very adaptable to these tasks. Because in our case specifically, we adjust prices on a quarterly level, and the declarations are issued every time that adjust the price and costs, and this certainly takes a lot of time. Next stage, when we understood that every day we have a truck leaving Siberia location with our cargo, we understood that we didn't have enough of these trucks. Since we're on the return leg, and we use the cars that are being unloaded somewhere in Siberia and Mongolia, and then they take the return cargo to Europe. And we decided to create a buffer warehouse in Moscow region because the trucks that go from Europe, there are more cars going from Moscow and Moscow region to Europe compared to Siberia. In parallel, we found out that this scheme also allows to save the costs because the delivery to the Moscow warehouse is being done in rubles compared to European deliveries in euros, and it is really cheaper in spite of the fact that we had an opportunity or even a necessity in Moscow to unload the trucks, stock our tires and discs in the warehouse, and then find another truck, but still we managed to save the costs. Next stage we have come across, or next stage we have taking into account the long leg. The delivery usually takes 14 days from the plant to the European warehouse. We had to constantly have a certain inventory at the warehouse. Besides, there are the shutdown periods both at Ford plant and here in Russia we have our national holidays when people are not working. And for example, in December, the conveyor belt is stopped for 2 weeks, and then we have 7, previously even 10 days of holidays in January. Hence, we tried to work in accordance of a temporary customs declaration mode. It turned out to be very convenient and time-saving. We have managed to save time significantly of trucks dead time due to customs clearance. In spite of the fact whether the day is a work day or a holiday, the trucks are always moving, never mind whether it is day or night. We also transferred to this temporary customs declaration and thus saved the costs for documentation and also cost of works. If we come back to the beginning of my presentation, back in 2014, we spent almost 24 hours or even more for one declaration because the truck had to take the documents to the customs that was located 100 kilometers away. Now we can finalize everything within 1 hour. Besides, When you are committed to work with OEM, you will have risks, never mind your wishes. So we constantly monitor the situation and try to develop alternative ways of delivering our cargoes. We tried containerized deliveries by rail, tried rail per se. Up to now, the most effective solution and the most predictable solution is motor roads. Moreover, when you are the only supplier, you have a very high level of reliability because there is a risk that the conveyor belt may be stopped. We have an experience of air deliveries when we were doing some express deliveries in order for the conveyor not to stop. And the geopolitical situation matters here. You all remember in March 2015, when the conflict of transfer through Poland, or the problems of transfer through Poland, and Ukraine started. And we had to track and trace every truck on an individual basis because the situation was really very precarious. Fortunately, we finally have a decree of the Russian government, number 496, in which not only automotive manufacturers but also the parts suppliers are provided with an opportunity to try and receive compensation for at least part of export costs and expenses. We hope that it will start working and partially will improve our marginality. You have seen our tariffs, the 3 to 4 euro per each tire we spend for each delivery decreases the marginality of our products. So if the government really supports us, we will improve our marginality and increase our export supplies. That's it on my side.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And it's good to hear of a success story of a Russian part supplier exporting to major car makers outside of Russia. So that's excellent news. But you also shared a little bit some of your challenges. And maybe we'll hear a little bit more of that side of the customs side from our next speaker, Alexander Kovalenko, the National Customs Manager for JEFCO. Thank you, Alexander.
Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. Once again, let me introduce myself, Alexander Kovalenko, National Customs Manager, JEFCO Russia, responsible for the whole range of the customs operation within JEFCO Russia. Actually, globally, our scope of operations covers around 33 countries, and we as global company have 12,000 employees on average and 4.2 billion of euro in turnover. That's our scope of the global operations. So if we talk about the operations that we normally do in Russia customs-wise, we perform all the scope of operations for the automotive logistics, as well as importation of the finished vehicles. We do numerous brands, around 10 brands are under the coverage of our customs operations. On top of this, we do the inbound and outbound logistics for the automotive components for the numerous manufacturing plants. And of course, we support our customers with the customs operations for the spare parts aftermarket logistics. So today the scope of my presentation is the, let's say, most recent tasks and most recent challenges that the automotive industry faced with customs-wise during the years 2015, 2016, and that we will be facing this very year as well. So the brief agenda is like this. First, I would like to tell you about our experience in managing of the Turkish risks that many of the Russian manufacturers and many of the Russian manufacturers of the importers have faced with. Then I will briefly tell you about the problems with the utility tax payments. This problem is extremely crucial for the construction equipment importers. So after this, I will tell you a little bit about the ESC labeling process, because the practice of this issue constantly changes within the Russian customs practice. On top of this, I will describe you briefly about the problems with the certification that come from the other countries of the Eurasian Economical Unions, and after this, I will briefly describe you the practice and, let's say, how things are planned in terms of the implementation of the electronic passport in the nearest future. So, the Turkish risk. So, as you know, after the famous accident that happened in Syria in 2015, as of November 2015, there were additional measures of the control of the Turkish origin goods or the goods that were passing through transit operations through Turkey were implemented by Russian customs. Means that every part of consignment delivered either from Turkey or delivered via Turkey have been examined 100% by the customs authorities. This means the 100% physical check, weighing of the products, as well as sending them to the customs laboratory. Of course, this issue increased the costs of the customs operations because goods needed to be placed at the customs warehouses, and the physical inspections needed to be done. That is why the cost increased significantly, and the delays in customs clearance process has also increased significantly. So, that's it. Basically, on one hand, Turkey is not the biggest automotive country. On the other hand, many of our clients have 30%, 40%, and even 80% of supplies coming either from Turkey or from Turkish origin. That is why normally we change the practice of the declaring of Turkish products, making the preliminary inspection practice instead of the physical inspection during the customs clearance process. It let us decrease the lead time for the customs clearance of Turkish products from 10 days till 3 or 4 days for the thousands of line items that were cleared during the customs operations. So, many issues that have the construction equipment importers faced with is the payment of utility tax. The matter is that there are some discrepancies in the technology of the utility tax payment. According to the legislation, the utility tax should be paid according to the maximum weight. However, in the standards of the certification or in any other standards, there is no precise description of what the maximum weight is. In the beginning of our practice, the manufacturers of the construction equipment provided us with the guarantee letters, and these guarantee letters satisfied the customs as a matter of calculation of the maximum weight. After that, in the beginning of the year 2016, the practice of the calculation of the maximal weight for the utility tax payment purposes changed significantly, and customs implemented another way, and it started calculating the maximal weight as of the present weight of the construction equipment and the maximal loading of the construction equipment, which increased the payment significantly. So, and at present, this practice of the utility tax payment is implemented through all the customs authorities, and unfortunately the fiscal payments on top of this increased significantly for the importers of the construction equipment. So basically the issue with EAC labeling started in the year 2014. The issue is also a matter of the unclearness of the present customs legislation and present standardization legislation. It is said that EIC labeling is to be implemented before the goods enter the, let's say, Russian market. However, it is not clearly stated where the customs clearance and the importation procedure is a real entrance to the Russian market, or this real entrance to the Russian market is treated like entrance before the goods will be sold to the final customer. So, and in the year 2014, starting from the Northwest Customs Administration based in St. Petersburg, customs authorities started to implement separate measures of the control. So, and as of now, they are implementing the measures of control and treat lack of EAC labeling as valuation of the certification legislation and impose respective penalties on the importers and block the importation procedures, unfortunately. On top of this, in customs practice, we have many of, let's say, clashes with the other members, countries of the Eurasian Economical Union, like Kazakhstan, like Belarus, like Kyrgyzstan, like Armenia. So, and in April 2017, nevertheless, it is clearly stated in the customs legislation and the agreement of the Customs Code of Eurasian Economical Union that certificates issued in any country of the Eurasian Economical Union are valid through all the Eurasian Economical Union, and normally Russian customs have no right to cancel or to demand extra certification for the products that have been certified in other countries of Eurasian Economical Union, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia or Kyrgyzstan. Unfortunately, in April 2017, they implemented the practice and started deny accepting the certification issued in other countries of the Eurasian Economical Union. There were a lot of discussion in the Eurasian Economical Committee, and at the end of the day, this issue was settled between the parties of the Eurasian Economical Union. However, this matter also implemented a lot of extra delays and a lot of extra costs on the importers of records that faced with this very problem during the Russian customs practice. So, and actually, the last point of my presentation that is quite, let's say that according to our opinion will put a significant impact on all the practice of the brokerage and other operations on the FVL market of Russia is the implementation of the electronic passports. Normally they have been implemented, the system of the electronic passports have been implemented as of the 1st of July 2017. Actually, the idea of the system is quite transparent and quite clear that for the Russian-produced vehicles or for the importers' vehicles, the owners will no longer have the passport of transport vehicles on the paper. This means that the system will more or less work as a state register of the real estate, that you only receive the confirmation from the state register of the passports of transport vehicles that you are the owner of this and very car. On top of this, the idea covers a lot of other sides of the transport vehicles arrangements, such as insurance, so that the insurance companies will see all the history of this or that vehicle, such, let's say, as customs, as banks, and many others. So, however, there are some, let's say, problems. First of all is that normally it is announced that this service, so to say, will not be free of charge. The last projects of documents, nevertheless, they were declined by the Ministry of Industry and Trade and by the Association of the European Business. implemented some extra, let's say, demands for such newcomers. First of all, is that the passport of transport vehicles will not be free of charge. The charge that is described during the professional society is from 250 till 600 rubles. Either this charge will be taken once, or it is also discussed in professional societies that this charge can be taken every time that you make any registration activity with your vehicle. This means importation, first charge, then registration, another charge. When you sell the car, another charge. So that's it. Basically, one of the main problems for the time being is that this system is not fully covered by the Russian legislation. Nevertheless, it works. It also needs to be, it needs the government decrees to be implemented, because right now it is not even stated what are the, which is the exact quantity of the information that is to be implemented in this sphere, in the sphere of passport of transport vehicles. And the second biggest problem for the passports of transport vehicles is, of course, lack of EDI solutions. This means that for the time being, the system works that you just input all the information manually, and it doesn't give you, let's say, any opportunity for real EDI solution and any, let's say, optimizations of your operations. So what will change, let's say, what will change in details and what will change in reality? For the time being, when you make the customs clearance of the finished vehicles, during the interaction with the excise customs of Russian Federation, basically as an outcome of your customs operations, you receive two main documents. The first document is the customs declaration that actually confirms the legalization of your transport vehicle on the Russian Federation. And another document is the passport of transport vehicle that confirms your ownership and that lets you implement all the rights that you have towards this transport vehicle, that lets you sell the vehicle, go for a loan in the bank for this vehicle, and so on and so forth. The situation will soon change. Right now we are having only the test period. However, soon the result of customs clearance will be only the customs declaration. Obtaining implementation and let's say arrangements of the passport of transport vehicle will soon become a separate operations. Right now, many manufacturers received the test access to the system, as well as many of the market players. However, this system will not doesn't work as it should work for the time being. This means that in terms of the results of the customs clearance, the situation will change, and implementation and obtaining the passport of transport vehicle will be a separate operation, and it will become a separate operation soon. According to the Russian legislation, these measures will be fully implemented, and circulation of the passport of transport vehicles issued on the paper will stop in July 2018. So that's it. So here is the brief scheme of who will have the access to the system of the passport of transport vehicles. So the customs, however, the customs will not input the data directly. The certification authorities, the tax services, the Russian road police, the financial organizations such as insurance companies and banks, the manufacturers, the standardization organization, and so-called authorized users. The main issue is that who can become the authorized users. For the time being, once again, it is just a project. However, it is a lot of project of the document that is just right under the discussion. For the time being, the licensed company who will be right to the access of the system of the passports of transport vehicles will demand, let's say, will demand to have a criminal laboratory. I don't know what are the exact purposes, however it is demanded. It will be demanded, obviously, according to the last projects of the documents. It will demand the security payment of 20 million rubles, meaning several certification, which is more or less similar to the customs brokerage certification. And on top of this, this will require having your 3D scanner in the facilities for checking of the transport vehicles. So needless to say that the conditions are quite heavy, and there are not much market players that will be able to implement these conditions and will be able to have real access to the system of the passport vehicles. So that is why actually we will, the whole industry of the automotive logistics will face with this issue, and this will be one of the most crucial issues in this very year and upcoming year of 2018. So basically, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for giving us an update on what's happening on the customs side. And now you can see everything is simple and easy, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Next up to hear about some more opportunities, perhaps for investment in automotive logistics, I'd like to welcome to the stage Ksenia Sizova, an associate from DLA Piper. Thank you, Ksenia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Добрый день, коллеги, дамы и господа. Я рада приветствовать столь представительную аудиторию и, как всегда, благодарю организаторов.
As usual, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the organizers for having been invited. And so I'll be able to brief the audience on the latest changes in the legislation related also to the state measures of support. First of all, I would like to underscore the fact that in the previous forum, I expanded upon the issue related to support of new investors via SPICs, special investment contracts, which are already there and signed with some of the companies in the automotive sector, and also regarding the support of those companies which received for their products made in Russia status. That is, they confirmed that their products could be perceived as made in Russia, in Russian territory. Without any doubt, the regulatory framework towards this end was evolving throughout 2015 and 16. But in 2016, other changes were taken on board, also mindful of the topic of support of local manufacturing in automotive sector as well. I would like to highlight in the governmental decree mentioned by Alexander. It's about support in the way of compensation out of federal budget for the transportation costs of products sent for export. By the compensation or subsidies, we mean those products which are covered by it also in the motor vehicle sector, which is included into the high-tech products list. And there are some regulatory documents which were modifying this list pretty often, and currently it's going to be modified again. There is a draft bylaw adding up part of the products which could be covered by this list and correspondingly by subsidies. And the subsidy will imply the compensation of transportation costs for logistic leg from Russian manufacturer all the way out to the counterparty abroad. From the official official statements of Ministry for Industries and Trade and the Department of Automotive Industries, we can see that export, without any doubt, is one of the highest priorities, directions, which has been already given a helping hand by the state. And over the recent 10 years, since between 2006 and 2016, the export per se is amounting up to $9 billion roughly. Out of this number, more than 1% is the products of the heavy engineering and transportation equipment. The Ministry for Industries and Trade has got lots of measures for import substitution for the current year, and they are going to increase the export of products by 10 or 15%. And by the year 2020, they are going to treble it.
The Russian Export Center will be a link in terms of providing subsidies. And based on the information from the center, there is already a trend to increase the exports volume. In particular, the export in the course of the first quarter has risen by 28% in terms of light cars and 14% in terms of trucks. In the federal budget for 2017, 2018, and 2019, the funds have been allocated for subsidies to compensate the costs for transportation in terms of export deliveries, almost 12 billion rubles. What are the main prerequisites for these investments? First, the company has to be a manufacturer of the product. The company that applies for subsidy or some affiliated entity. What does it mean? You certainly know that there is a certain division into companies that manufacturers, importers, or traders. So trading houses that are not actually manufacturing may also apply for a subsidy because they sell the products that is produced by their group, that are produced by their groups. Another prerequisite in terms of offshore zones in many regulatory acts for receiving one status or other, for example, authorized economic operator, this is a kind of a limitation. If the company that pretends to have subsidies, more than 50% are the share of companies registered in the offshore areas, these companies cannot apply for subsidies. Certainly, one of the main prerequisites is no debts in terms of current taxes and customs payments. Also, if the company, on the basis of local legislation, I'm speaking about the subsidies from the federal budget, mind you, but in some regions, there are similar measures for compensation from regional budgets, compensation of similar costs. And certainly, if the costs have been compensated from these regional budgets, the company cannot apply for federal compensation, federal subsidy. The company, or as I've already told, the link between the company that wants to receive subsidies will be the Russian Export Center. And it is no secret that the kind of an intermediary between the regulator and investor are the funds and unions of this kind, in particular in terms of special investment contacts. We have the Industry Development Fund, but in our case, in the case of subsidies, it will be the Export Center. Thus, the company, if it wants to apply for investments or subsidies, has to apply to the Russian Export Center. And the main document that will give a right to receive the subsidy will be an agreement signed between, it will be a tripartite agreement between the company center and the Ministry of Industry and Trade. The company, there is an extensive list of documents to be provided for subsidy in the decree. As an example, I may tell that these are mainly the documents that approve for all the costs borne by the company for transportation and the calculation of the subsidy itself. It is not the government that calculates the subsidy, it's the company itself that calculates it. When calculating the subsidy, the company has to be based on the supporting documents, on the costs and expenses borne, and has to define a coefficient it may use to receive the subsidy. Which coefficients or ratios I'm speaking about? In the primary version of the decree, there were three ratios, 0.8, 0.4, and 0.6 and 0.2. Meaning 80, 60, or 20% of compensation. But on June 13, 2 months after the decree has been adopted, there were some amendments made because representatives of automotive companies decided that the companies that are now working in accordance with the industrial assembly contracts, their rights have been they were suffering some lack of rights because they could apply only for 20% of compensation. And so those who have already invested, those who are producing already, but are not using full capacity, are receiving higher compensation than the companies that have signed the SPICs and apply for investments. So the amendments have been made, and now only two ratios remain, 80% of compensation and 60% of compensation. I have not mentioned in the beginning that this decree is applicable not only for automotive, but also for all industries, and this 80% of compensations are embedded for all the others. As for automotive, more broader requirements are set up, and the coefficient envisaged is 0.6. To make it simpler, the main thing for to receive 80% compensation, the company either has to have an agreement for industrial assembly. This applies for the automotive components. As for vehicles manufacturers, decide for the industrial assembly agreement, if there is one. They have to confirm the Made in Russia status. Made in Russia status is confirmed in two ways. Either fulfilling the operations that have been set up by the decree number 719, and the Ministry of Industry and Trade produces confirmation that you produce your product in Russian, or the certificate on the origin of goods. You also have to pay attention to the limits of compensation set up by the decree. Different companies are being used, and different tariffs apply for various companies. You may look at these limits. For example, for one 40-feet container, the compensation cannot exceed 300,000 rubles, 20-feet container, 160,000 rubles. So you may compare how much you pay with these limits. On the whole, the compensation of the subsidies for the company cannot exceed 25% of the cost of the goods sold. Summing up, I want to draw the attention of the companies that are already exporting or who plan to export to pay more attention to this new mechanism of compensating transportation costs. Such mechanisms do not usually envisage certain companies. The FIFO rule applies first in, first out. Who will be the first one to apply will most probably get this subsidy. Nobody has yet applied for the compensation, but this is quite clear because the amendments have just been made and the companies are studying the mechanism of subsidies and are considering how all the documents may be gathered for application. On the basis of our customers, we see that there is a certain interest in this mechanism, in this scheme. So please do study all the documents. And I think it may be of interest for many of you, a good incentive method. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. Interesting and good to hear that there is plans to support and invest all industries, and obviously, the automotive industry is an important industry. So there are opportunities there. Again, as with anything linked to any government, and that definitely includes the Russian government, it's a little bit complex and complicated and not easy. But it seems, if possible, if you can understand it and get expert advice, then there are opportunities there. So, but on the other hand, I think there was also a running theme through this session about the complications. The government seems to be trying to do things to move things forward, but they're a little bit complicated and again a slow process. And I suppose I should say that on certain things like customs and investment from the government, it's a global issue. It isn't a Russian issue. It's something. The customs issue is something that comes up at most of our conferences around the world. So it isn't a Russian-specific problem. But on the other hand, if you're working in Russia and there is a desire to improve and grow imports and exports, then it's something that has to be fixed. So again, this is your opportunity to ask some questions. I should just point out that at the end of this session, we'll be doing some more of the voting questions. So if you want to log on to that, then please prepare for that, and you can use it for other questions as well. So, for example, there is one comment on there about we're not sure what the Wi-Fi code is. I don't know what the Wi-Fi code is, but hopefully either someone will let me know what the Wi-Fi code is, and I'll let you know. But that's a simple way of showing how this app can be used. But now onto the questions. Does anyone have a question to start? And I should also point out, if you think by being quiet you're going to have lunch earlier, I do have some questions myself, so you're not going to escape. So if you have any questions, you might as well ask them. And I'm very pleased that we have our best question person to start the questions, please.
Okay, thank you. Спасибо. Дмитрий Паншин, Альянс Рено-Ниссан. Вопрос-комментарий Ксении.
It is my question and a comment to Ksenia. Look, the situation is as follows. For foreign automotive manufacturers having production in Russia, it is very important to localization of new models production. The decision is made in advance. The horizon of such decision-making is, to my assessment, 4 or even 5 years. Hence, in course of this decision-making, certain kind of business planning is being conducted, and the expenses that the company will bear if the production of the new model will be located in Russia is being performed. This includes logistics costs, quite naturally, taking into account that the government proposes to compensate part of these costs, which we use and plan to use in the future as well. We want very much to include this possibility into our calculations in order to show better conditions for our parent company and bring in new models to our plans. But the government shows us the horizon up to 2019, and that's it. We do not know what will happen further on. We come to a vicious circle in order to attract the models that will be exported as well. I'm speaking by the prism of export models, or the models meant for export. We would like to take this subsidy into account, but we do not have the subsidy because the plans do not go as far. Thus, we do not receive the export, we do not receive the new models, and how do we break this vicious circle? It is very difficult to tell. But now my question, or maybe I may ask you a favor. In our community, we would like very much to hear more signals addressed to the government in order for them to show the future in terms of subsidies, not for 2 or 3 years, but as a minimum for 5 years. This will help a lot in terms of placement of new models and the models that potentially may be exported. Thank you for your comment. I certainly agree with you fully that midterm planning, I say nothing of long term, is very difficult when there are no guarantees in terms of subsidies. But you also must understand that the scope of subsidies, the amounts set up in the budget are made not for 10 years in advance, and the calculation of this logistics cost that may be compensated will be of interest for your top management as well when making the decisions. But on the other hand, when we speak about the position of the community, it is clear that when the company or several companies present their positions, it happens at many platforms of and associations, and the government receives and hears about the problems from the industry. These are the things that have to be done in union. You have to unite as companies and try to deliver this, because the export center, being an agent of the government, they are not making decisions in this sphere. So you as a business have to act via different associations and thus address the government.
Any other questions? No? A question really on the on kind of similar points about how the government is also, or maybe the localization. There is a desire for more localization in Russia. So SKAD are an example of a company who are a local company and improving what they're doing as well as exporting as well. But is there support to the part suppliers, both from the government but also from OEMs? Are they really encouraging the part suppliers to grow in Russia, and are the part suppliers growing in Russia? So I guess a question for all of the panel, maybe starting with you, Mr. Golovanets, about how there is support for the part suppliers in Russia to support the Russian automotive industry. From the car makers, but for the automotive industry. Sorry.
я говорил уже в первый раз,
As I've already mentioned, the government has paid its attention to the components supplies for the first time, and we have an opportunity now to be one of the lucky ones to receive the compensation for part of our costs, transportation costs. And as you've heard, some of the amendments happened to take place in June. Some of the suppliers were lucky to be part of the list, the others not. Now we are trying to collect all the documents needed and try to receive the compensation for part of our costs. I may comment on my side. Certainly, great support. Why so many manufacturers are here? Everybody knows this mode of industrial assembly that is limited by the end of 2020. And you all know the opposition of two ministries. I speak about the Ministry of Industry and Trade that proposes to use the SPIC mechanism further on, though the business doesn't understand fully how the companies that have already invested and built the plants and up to 40 to 50% are not using their full capacity, but have to use the new mechanism of SPICs and invest more.
The Ministry for Industrial Development supports the prolongation of the mode of industrial assemblies, and it was covered broadly by mass media, and there were official stands by the representatives of the Ministry for Economic Development that the minister charged the corresponding agencies a year ago to calculate all those components of localization, all the indicators. That concept was developed in September previous year. It was submitted to the government and it was approved on the whole. And for the this reincarnation, so to put it, to be in full-fledged until the year end, it should be further developed so that there will be a new regulatory act passed, which should clearly prescribe all the mechanisms of subsidizing, because we're talking about subsidies here, because within the frameworks of WTO, we're not entitled to compensate the costs for payment for the customs duty. And in the protocol, we're saying that in mid-2018, all those custom duties will be leveled up. So in order to provide the companies with the ability to extend this agreement, to make a new agreement, to identify the terms they're going to work and to do for the localization until the year. And this document should be officially promulgated. And provided the support is there, without any doubt, that will attract new investors, because the component production will be developed further. We see the companies which come along to us, the companies which didn't tap the Russian market, but they were globally with those OEMs which are already here. First thing they evaluate and figure out is those incentives, tax benefits, subsidies, however you call it, from the state they would be entitled to, notwithstanding the fact that the Minister for Economic Development considers that those duties for components are at a very low level. On the average is 5 or 6% out of the total cost of goods. Nonetheless, it's necessary to consider each product and each company separately, case by case, because some have got large volume of import. They didn't yet shift to localization, to local suppliers when it comes to metals, components of plastics, and the cost of those components is pretty high, even at the rate of 5 or 6% customs duty. The costs are significant. So the continuation of such a mode will expedite further localization of component production in Russia.
Okay, a question for me on the customs side, and perhaps it's me just misunderstanding, but Alexander Kovalenko, you explained some of the changes that are happening in customs, but it seems to me that the changes, there are changes, but they're not necessarily quick improvements. They are just moving the problems around a little bit. Have I misunderstood?
Спасибо за вопрос. Позвольте отвечу на русском языке.
Thank you very much. Let me answer in Russian. From the perspective of the way customs legislation and customs activities are developing, and the situation for all the foreign trade operators, importers and exporters, there is some progressive movements towards the improvement of the situation is clearly seen. Period. Over the recent 11 years, there was a drastic slump of time spent for customs operations and customs clearance. Electronic declaration system was taken on board. At the initial stage, it made most of the economic operators very skeptical. Nonetheless, it was a far cry between the way the declaration was submitted as far back as 1990s, when a broker was coming up to customs officer with a stack of paper, and the officer would say, "No time, come tomorrow." E-trading, e-declarations established some KPIs on interactions with customs authorities, customs officers. To say that the improvements are not there would not be fair. The improvements are around, to my way of thinking, and to the opinion of most of the economic operators. Another thing is that if we look to more short-term perspective, whether now it's much better versus 2 years back from now, here the difference is not so noticeable. As to 2 or 3 years down the road, will we see much better situation for us or not? That remains to be seen. Many customs procedures are based on the fact that the customs agency is the largest customs agency, providing for highest revenues to the budget from the perspective of the supervision over the major KPIs and indicators such as customs value, certification, different codes of international trade. It's most unlikely that everything will be changed, but actually there is a clean priority for state control along the lines of customs development. Customs agency is fully aware that the cut of costs for customs clearance and the speedier customs clearance is the highest priority to enhance the logistical efficacy in our country. So those improvements are there. They are around. They are obvious. But to expect radical changes or radical improvements, or to expect that just moving between our countries and countries of the European Union and so on, the conditions would be as comfortable as in the territory of the EU. We don't have to rely upon that, because in advanced countries, customs services provide for 5 or 7% to the national budget. In our country, it's about 50%. So the major chunk of different supervising for applied now, they will be still there in future as well. So I cannot be crystal clear in answer to your question, frankly speaking. Let me recap on that. Actually, I absolutely agree with what Alexander says, that presently there is some shift of customs control. And for many years, it's a shift from the stage of registration to post-clearance and stage. And in a new code around the EU, since the upcoming year, it says that the declaration could be issued without some follow-up documents. That is a novella in EU customs law. It's embedded into that law that the customs declaration will be the only document submitted during customs clearance. As to post-clearance customs control, without any doubt, major importers encountered the issues of control, supervision, inspections done after the goods were cleared and sold. The so-called the chamber inspections. The major problem is that at the end of the day, the company is demanded to come up with extra documents, and the company is not participating somehow in this process. It's no part of the process. There is no dialogue. The company is not able to prove their stand, their position. And the customs, they just submit the documents, and the customs just are not demanded, or the customs don't have to give the clear-cut answer to the company submitted extra documents. Nonetheless, there was an open governmental hearing about those the Q2 results, and Mr. Seleznov had his speech as well. Mr. Seleznov is the head of this agency, government agency controlling post-clearance. They say, so there is the deadline and the tenor for this chamber for this inspection to the company, and this information is part of the documents. This is important because such so-called chamber inspections sometimes procrastinate for 2 or 3 years. And this governmental agency launched the experiment into supervising agencies for electronic inspection. The documents will not be requested in paper form. That's important by the end of May, actually. As to one of the companies, we brought the truck packed full of paper documents, and it's only the part of documents because some of them were provided electronically. As to the remaining documents, it's a huge pile, a truck full of documents. So, of course, we hope to get rid of big chunk of paperwork when the new customs code is taken on board. The situation will be better, that's clear. Let me say a few words. Of course, it also depends on the customs borders in different customs outposts in different places and different federal entities, let's say. Let's say if the customs is very good and advanced, it's fully electronically. The declaration is made promptly, no customs officer's stamp. A driver doesn't even know where customs is located. He gets those documents for bills of ladings and goods and goes. In other customs outposts like Domodedovo and other, they require paper form documents where they could put a stamp. 2 different worlds, 2 different universes, and they are only located 500 kilometers apart. Though it depends on the custom located here and there. Unfortunately, yes, because law enforcement practices in different customs, even within one region, is very different here in Russia. It's akin to the institute of the authorized economic operator when the goods are getting from abroad to the company's warehouse directly, and the customs could not come to terms to the fact that those goods are passing by them, and those customs guys don't see them. It's electronic declaration, and the customs don't get those goods in their customs control zone. So that was devastating for them. And every time the customs guys were sending their own inspector to come to the grounds of the operator, watching how those goods were warehoused at the border. So currently, maybe operators can confirm that customs finally came to terms with that. By law, it's quite good, so they don't have to pay visit every time to them to check it out.
There is a question here on the app, and it's for someone who's perhaps looking to invest in Russia. It says, is there any official organization in Russia helping foreign companies to go through all the legal and customs aspects of cooperation with Russian production plants?
Вы имеете в виду, что
When there is a cooperation between factories and they do the localization jointly, or any investor, whosoever.
Unfortunately, it's a written question.
Ну, если я правильно поняла, смотрите, вот есть.
So, talking about cooperation between OEMs, let's say, within the agreement about industrial assembling, the companies got united. They work in a single pool. Those volumes of manufacturing which were declared previously in the industrial assembling were quite stern, 350,000 SKU. That was too much. On top of that, localization up to 60% was rather burdensome for OEMs. As far as I know, in the new concept, embedded by the Ministry for Economic Development about law, new industrial assembling, it's a digression from such alliances because we're fully aware, all of that was, we know the score. We've been around, we know the score. We know what it means, localization for the company when they work in the pool. On top of that, when new projects are launched, it's a very high level of imported components, and testing should be done, and they should streamline the communications with local just suppliers. It would be the wrong kind of localization. That is why, as whether in future there will be a digression from those alliances and whether they will be working together, that will mean no investments for them. Actually, according to our experts' examination, it will impact strongly those companies who would like to tap this market on their own, on new industrial assembly, because the level of localization will not be diminished by the state. That's the policies of the import substitution.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think now we'll go on to the voting questions. So again, if you are able to log on to our app and get ready to ask some more questions, or to answer the questions. I'll be asking the questions and you can answer them. Again, it's a good opportunity to hear the views of the people in the room, so you can find out what the majority kind of rules are. The instructions for the app are, once again, can be found in the back of the printed program. So we've just got a few questions. So if we can get the questions up, please. So we're looking at the opportunities. So where do you see the biggest opportunities for vehicle makers and part suppliers in Russia? Is it the growth in the domestic market as the Russian market goes up? Is it operating more and exporting more for Russia? Or is there again the negative answer? I don't see much in the way of market development in Russia. So if you can answer the question, please. So this is how the car makers and part suppliers' opportunities are for growth. Okay, so again, positive answers. The best opportunities, growth within the domestic market, which hopefully is coming. But there also are some opportunities in exporting, as SKAD have done by by exporting more. A similar question, but this is for the logistics service providers in the room. Where do you see the best opportunities for logistics service providers coming from? Again, is it growth in the domestic market? Is it growth in the export market? Is it work outside of the automotive sector? Or is it by automotive work outside of Russia, by opening new companies or just growing more outside of Russia as opposed to the working within Russia? So where do you see the best opportunities for LSPs coming from? So again, answer now, please. So again, the hope is growth in the domestic market. Worryingly for me and for us is by finding work outside of the automotive sector. Although it makes sense, I hope it doesn't mean leaving the automotive sector, but it just means broadening the work that you do. And then, again, reasonable numbers for growth in the export markets and for automotive work outside Russia. The next question is really about the Russian government, and we covered that a little bit in this session. But how can the Russian government best support the country's automotive logistics industry? Is it with sales support schemes to help the sale of cars? Is it with greater investment in infrastructure? Is it by making the customs regimes more efficient, as we've just discussed? Or is it by just getting out of the way that there's far too much regulation and government involvement at the moment already? So again, if you can answer this question now, please. Okay, quite even. The lower answer is greater investment in infrastructure. I'm not sure if it's not a necessity or whether we're being realistic in our expectations. But sales support schemes are relatively obvious. We've heard today about the challenges with the customs. And of course, interesting that, maybe if we can get government out of the way, it might make the industry more efficient. So thank you very much for your answers on those. I hope they've been useful for you. But I'd also especially like to thank the panel for a very interesting discussion there, where we heard opportunities, challenges, things that are changing, and things that we need to know, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. These are things we need to know and be prepared for. So thank you very much for the panel for their great contribution there. Thank you very much. Again, if you can, let us know what you thought of the session to help us to understand what we can do to build the program here in Russia. But otherwise, join us for lunch. We'll be back in this room at 2 p.m. For a more practical discussion on what people are doing for automotive logistics in Russia. So thank you very much for the morning. Thank you.